Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my parents' basement in the great state of Kansas, and coming to you in this live stream to talk about the year 1970 and basically what happened in music this year. Touch on all the big albums that came out and also all the big news events that came out concerning music as well. I like to try to make these videos before we do our top 10 albums of that year. I've gone through all the 60s, 60 through 69. Uh, Me and my friends did top 10 albums each year. Plus, I try to do a video like this where I talk about music in general of that year. This time around, we did our top 10 albums 1970 already. Just a couple weeks ago, I think. We did that. Me, Scott from Sound Lab Studios, Brad from Briar's Music Showcase, and Nick from Townsend 505. We all did a 3 hour. You can look on my live streams, it's a 3 hour live stream. So we had a lot to say about 1970. It was a really great year of music and a lot of different albums to talk about. Anyway, so before, usually I do it before we do our top 10, but the top 10 kind of came all of a sudden. We all got together and did our top 10, and so I wasn't able to get this video out. So it's coming afterwards. Where after we did our top 10, you can see on my channel. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I think about 1970, kind of, and talk about what all happened here to kind of recap the year. Of course, we're starting a new decade, new era of music, basically. It feels like every time a decade ends and a new decade begins, it feels like there's a change in the air. There's something different happening. Uh, you know, bands are, some bands are going to be, or, bands are going to be breaking up. New bands are going to be starting. They're going to be huge for that decade. It's always fun to kind of see what's going on. In 1970, we're going to see the end of the greatest band of all time, in my opinion. The Beatles put out their last album this year, Let It Be. They actually recorded in 1969 before they did Abbey Roads, but because of all the changing the producer and all this, it took a little bit while to get it all put together, and they finally get together for 1970. So, Beatles, most influential band of the 60s, obviously, and the biggest band of the 60s. So it kind of it fits, that we're going to end the 60s and start the 70s, and we're also going to end the Beatles as well. So they kind of encapsulate the 60s and kind of get to go off, and all the members get to do their solo careers. Because what's kind of interesting about 1970 is not only do we get the last Beatles album, but we do get kind of the debut of the four members somewhat. Ringo actually put out the first album, Sentimental Journey, like a year before, yeah, maybe in '69, I think. But this year he puts out Blue Cups of Blues. His second album actually comes out this year, which is an all country album that he didn't do any of the writing. He had people write the songs for him. But we get some major albums, I think, from the other members. Probably the biggest one is All Things Must Pass from George Harrison. Many consider it his greatest album, but definitely his most iconic album that everybody thinks about. Not my favorite George Harrison album, but definitely I understand a lot of people absolutely love that album. Has some major hits on it, obviously, and it's a double/triple album, whatever you want to think about it. We also get McCartney. Paul McCartney gets his first debut album, McCartney, which starts off this trend of McCartney, McCartney 2, McCartney 3, which came out in 2020. And really only one real significant song, Maybe I'm Amazed, came off of that. And then John Lennon does Plastic Ono Band, really getting out some psychological issues with songs like Mom and God and My Mommy's Dead, definitely working through all this therapy, the scream therapy that he was doing at the time, dealing with the death, his mother and all that. Anyway, so those four, I mean, to me, pretty significant albums for those four coming out. Another 60s duo, probably the most influential duo, and especially in folk rock music, also is going to end at this point as well. Simon and Garfunkel, who put out so many amazing albums in the 60s, really defined duo performers. I think the greatest duo of all time. we do see their last album, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, coming out this year. So it's ending that partnership, and of course they'll go off to have their solo albums. Mostly, I follow Paul Simon, has some incredible albums after this. Anyway, so yeah, sad to see them go. Sad to see the Beatles also go away. Um, I would say getting into the 70s, of course, we were already getting into late 60s. I mean, blues rock was getting a little heavier. Psychedelic rock was huge in late 60s. It's definitely harder type music. Definitely, it's definitely going to a rougher, heavier sound. And I think 1970, we're definitely seeing the beginning of kind of heavy metal come in. And like I said, we already had Led Zeppelin put out 2 albums in 69. We get their third album this year as well. So they're one of the hardest, kind of rock bands at this point. Um, and we get maybe the hardest rock band we're going to get, and that's Black Sabbath, also debuting this year. Deep Purple also putting out an album, so definitely some more heavier rock music coming out at this point. Yet it's still, we're getting to some really good folk music as well. I think folk music is really picking up. We are going to be in peak folk music, in my opinion, with Bob Dylan still going strong at this point. Joni Mitchell is coming out with maybe her second or third album at this point, and she's getting better, I think, and she's going to put out some of her biggest albums here. James Taylor is starting to put out some big albums now. Harry Chapin will be putting some albums out. Jim Croce will be pretty soon. John Denver is going to be. John Denver put out an album already, but nothing big, I think, till next year in 71. So definitely get to 71 and early 70s. It's, to me, peak folk period. I mean, some of the best folk music I've ever heard, anyways. So it's kind of interesting seeing how all the trends are going for that. Besides that, I guess that's just kind of my overall thought of 1970, kind of where we're going. There's Scott there, who did top 10 albums with. Yeah, 60s, great decade for music. 1970, still amazing year for music. Putting my top 10 together, it was a great top 10. This is definitely one of my favorite years of music. When you still got Beatles putting out an album, Simon Garfunkel putting out pretty much their biggest album of their career. It's funny, they really ended on a high note with Bridge Over Troubled Waters. Then you get I'm trying to think who else should I have on my list. I mean, Van Morrison put out a great album. Neil Young put out a great album with After the Gold Rush. Guess Who putting out their biggest album, American Woman, out this year. Eric Clapton comes out with one of his best albums, Layla and Other Sorted Songs. Eric Clapton quitting Cream, and then he does Derek and Dominoes, and then he's going to start his solo career. So Eric Clapton's really starting his solo career at this point, and he's already considered one of the greatest guitar players of all time at this point after his stint with Cream. So I'm trying to think, what am I missing? Oh, well, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, they're putting out their second album, Deja Vu, which is considered their best album by many people. This is their second album right after 69. They put out Crosby, Stills and Nash. Spoiler for my list, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young has my favorite album in 69 and 1970. So back-to-back years, they put out my favorite album. I'm a big fan of that band. And even Stephen Stills puts out a solo album that year as well. And like I said, Neil Young puts out a solo album. So they're putting out great solo albums and the great Deja Vu album. I'm just looking at this list. Like, these are albums that are going to be a lot of top 100 favorite albums lists. If you look at anything, these are kind of some of the most iconic albums of all time. When you're talking about Bridge Over Troubled Waters, Led Zeppelin 3, let's say Deja Vu, Let It Be, Cosmo's Factory from Creedence Clearwater Revival, that has considered their greatest album as well. Moondance by Van Morrison is definitely one of his all-time great albums. Elton John also putting out his first album for the U.S. market, his self-titled album, Elton John. He put out an album for the UK in '69, but in the U.S., this is the first album. And it's definitely his big album. I mean, definitely a much bigger album than his first album, which I can't remember the name of his first album, but it had his first really big hit with Your Song on this. So Your Song's coming out. Elton John's starting to become really big. James Taylor puts out Sweet Baby James this year, which was a big song for him. Yeah, so some really great artists really putting out some incredible music. And so many iconic, to me. I mean, I can talk about Black Sabbath putting out Paranoid, which is pretty iconic. So yeah, lots of iconic albums that are making a lot of top 100 lists coming out this year. That's how incredible this year is in music. So let's get to what were the 10 best-selling albums of this year. What were the albums everybody was buying? Well, number one, the best-selling album this year was Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Simon Garfunkel. Like I said, that is definitely considered that and Bookends are the two albums most people are going to say are like their best albums. And I can't disagree. That's my favorite Simon Garfunkel album as well, and reached number 2 on my list. Almost was my favorite album in 1970. That's how close. And I believe it was on all 4 of our lists of my 4 friends, my 3 friends, and me. We all had Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I mean, that's definitely a must of this year. That's definitely, no doubt, that's one of the great albums of this year. One of the greatest albums of in my opinion, one of my favorite of all time. It's like a top 15 album for me all time. I mean, it used to be in my top 10. It's just barely out of my top 10 at the moment. So yeah, absolutely incredible album. So nice to see that it was the best selling album, considering how great it was as well. And it's crazy that this is their last album, their 5th and last album they do together, and it's their best selling album. It's their most popular one as well. At number 2, we have Led Zeppelin 3 by Led Zeppelin. So obviously been very big after Led Zeppelin 2, both huge sellers in 69. So it makes sense now we get into Led Zeppelin 3. There's a huge fandom now. Led Zeppelin to me is the biggest band of the 70s. I think when we get in the 70s, they're the band that takes over from the Beatles as being like the greatest band. As far as just record sales, concerts, their concerts really outsell a lot of huge concerts during this time period, and putting out some iconic rock music that we still listen to today. But yeah, so we got Led Zeppelin 3, which has the most famous song is the Immigrant Song, of course, that starts the album, is incredible. At number 3, we got Paranoid by Black Sabbath, which makes sense. This is definitely considered one of their great albums. Has some of their biggest hits on it early on, with I think Iron Man's on here, War Pigs, and Paranoid are like the 3 big hits on here. So 3 pretty huge hits for this Black Sabbath, of course, led by Ozzy Osbourne, who just passed away a couple months ago. I'm not huge on this album, though I do like the 3 big hits on it. But that's about it. I'm not a big Black Sabbath fan, but I know if you are a Black Sabbath fan, that was a pretty big album. At number 4, we have Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. My favorite album of this year, and it's a top 10 album all time for me. So nice to see one of my favorite albums here at number 4, best-selling album of the year. Absolutely incredible album. I can't recommend it enough. Obviously, it's my favorite album of the year. Top 10 album all time. And it's really cool to see Neil Young join Crosby, Stills, and Nash this year, add a little bit to it. Helpless is kind of the big song off of this album. He has a couple other ones, but Carry On is my favorite song on that album. It's great. Deja Vu is a great song. We have Woodstock, written by Joni Mitchell. They have a great cover of that, I guess you can say, or interpretation of that one, more rocking than her. Our House, Teach Your Children. I mean, just incredible songs by them. At number 5, we got Let It Be by the Beatles. So here are the Beatles. Last album, and they didn't even get number 1, but they do get top 5 still because they're still considered the great band of all time. And I think an underrated album. It was my 3rd favorite album of the year. And I mean, Let It Be, come on, it's one of the greatest songs of all time. My 2nd favorite Beatles song. So that alone, I mean, it makes such a great album. But I mean, Long Line Road, I think is great. Across the Universe. I've Got a Feeling. Get Back is in there. Two of Us. I mean, just incredible music. And number 6, we have Abraxas by Santana. So I don't know if this is his first. I don't think this must not be his first album because I didn't write him down as a debut album, but definitely early Santana music. And I'm not a big fan of Santana. I'm not big fan of that Latino sound that he has, but I think this is one of his big albums, if I remember right. Anyway, so it makes sense that it's in here. Number 7, we got Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits. So we always have a Greatest Hits album get in, and this is the one that gets in this year. So don't know much about Sly and the Family Stone. Haven't heard this Greatest Hits album, but popular enough to make number 7. Number 8, we have Cosmo's Factory, the 8th best-selling album of this year by CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Yeah, this is absolutely incredible album. One of my favorite. This was number 5 on my list for this year. And it was another album that was on all 4 of our lists. In fact, Scott from Sound Up Studios had number 1 on his list. That's how popular it is amongst us. Definitely his best known album from CCR, their peak at this point, after putting out like 3 albums. I think 69 they put out 3 albums or something like that. But this has all their big hits. I mean, Up Around the Bend's my favorite song, but yeah, looking through my back door. I think it's Who'll Stop the Rain. I think maybe it's on here. I heard Through the Grapevine. Love that cover. It's one of my favorite songs on the album. Traveling Band, Run Through the Jungle, and See the Light, I think it's called at the very end. Anyways, just absolutely some of their best music ever. Number 9, we have Moondance by Van Morrison. Absolutely incredible album by Van Morrison. Has some of his biggest solo work. The year before, he had, I think, Astral Weeks, which was a big album for him, though it didn't sell commercially. Moondance was definitely a more commercially sounding album and did much better selling-wise than Astral Weeks, though I know a lot of people love Astral Weeks. I prefer Moondance. I think this is an absolutely incredible album. In fact, I'm going to talk about the album tomorrow on my channel because it's part of our album exchange. So I'm going to talk even more about this tomorrow. So I won't deal too much, but it's an amazing album. My favorite Van Morrison album that I've heard so far. And I was the only one that had it on my list for this year. It reached number 6, I believe. Or did it reach number 5? Maybe this reached. No, I think Cosmo's Factory was number 4 and Moondance was number 5. So this was in my top 5 as well. And at number 10, we have Tea for the Tillerman for Cat Stevens. Definitely one of his big albums. Overall, a pretty good album. Didn't make it in my list, but I see why that's a popular album of Cat Stevens. It seems like this and another album, like his 2 big albums of this year. So another great singer-songwriter of this period. So those are 10 best-selling albums of 1970. Let's look at the Grammys. What was nominated for Grammy Album of the Year? Who won? And did they deserve it? I always kind of find funny when I'm looking at these and going, do the Grammys know what they're talking about? Is this really an album that we still talk about today? I'm glad to say that they're really hitting their stride at this point, the Grammys, where the albums that are winning are also considered great albums and are selling very well, as we have Bridge Over Troubled Waters winning Best Album of the Year. So, yeah, I can't argue with that choice. It was my second favorite album of the year. Definitely a deserving album if there ever was one. And nice to see Simon Garfunkel get one album of the year after they made, I think, to me, they have 3 like incredible albums. But anyways, yeah, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I mean, you have the song Bridge Over Troubled Waters, which also won the Grammy Song of the Year. So, I mean, this was just a huge year for Paul Simon, winning the 2 big Grammys for Album of the Year and Song of the Year for that. Obviously, their maybe most iconic song that they did, and just a really epic ballad that's very emotional and very, encouraging and all that through bad times. But I mean, you also have the Boxer, Cecilia is on there. I mean, oh my gosh, some incredible music, including some great stuff like The Only Living Boy in New York and Keep the Customer Satisfied. So Long, what's his name? So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright, I think is called. Baby Driver. I mean, there are so many great songs on this album. It's definitely iconic for a reason. So yeah, very happy to see that win Best Album of the Year. Very good choice by the Grammys. They got it right. Other albums that got nominated, we have Chicago by Chicago. Didn't make it in the top 10 best-selling albums, but interesting, it got here at Album of the Year. I do have that album, actually. I call it Chicago 2, but I guess it's a second Chicago album, but the first Chicago album is called Chicago Transit Authority or something like that, if I remember right. And so I guess this is just called Chicago, or you call it Chicago 2, I guess, because the next album is going to be called Chicago 3. Uh, so far, it's the best album I've heard so far from Chicago, but I've only heard a couple albums from them. I've heard like maybe 5 albums from Chicago. And this has my favorite Chicago song on it, 25 or 6 or 4. I do know. It's a double album, which Chicago's early albums are all doubles for some reason. I wish they would have made more singles. But anyways, yeah, so definitely a good album from them. Cool to see them get nominated here. We have Close to You by the Carpenters. So that's one of their big albums. And that song, Close to You, I know is a big song of theirs. I'm a fan of the Carpenters. I like their big hits. I can't say I've heard an album that I absolutely love from them, though. I haven't fell in love with any of their albums. We have Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. So, yeah, so happy to see that get nominated for Grammy Album of the Year. Of course, it would have been my choice, but I'm fine with Bridge Over Troubled Waters. But still, I'm glad they recognize the brilliance of Deja Vu, which also sold pretty well as well, top 5 album. So, pretty good year for Neil Young. I mean, putting out After the Gold Rush and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young in the same year, it's incredible. We also get Elton John by Elton John. So Elton John's self-debut album, second album in his discography, but kind of his debut album, gets here in the Grammys Album of the Year. And to close out the list, we got Sweet Baby James by James Taylor. So James Taylor again. It's funny, that didn't make my list from honorable mentions, but I am becoming a big fan of James Taylor. I've been listening to his albums lately, and always happy to see his name come across there. So yeah, those were the albums that good list. I mean, Grammys, great job. I mean, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, Deja Vu, really happy to see those on the list. And like I said, don't mind seeing Elton John or Chicago or the Carpet. I mean, that's a good list overall. I mean, anything that would be missing is maybe Let It Be. It'd been nice to see Let It Be on there, the last Beatles album. Perhaps Cosmo's Factory, maybe, or Moondance could have deserved to be on that list, but still a good list. All right, so I'm going to end the video talking about some of the major events that happened in 1970 to kind of give you an idea of what was going on during this year. Some interesting things going on, some major deaths as usual, and all that. First, we're going to talk about in January 4th, Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who, he fatally runs over his chauffeur trying to escape a mob, but it was ruled an accident. So lots of controversy going on with Keith Moon at this time. January 14th, Diana Ross and the Supremes performed for the last time. Diana Ross would quit the group and go solo at this point. So it's the last we're going to see. And Supremes was, again, we're talking about, Beatles, Simon Garfunkel. Supremes is right up there. They were huge in the 60s. Outside the Beatles, the Supremes probably had the second most #1 hits of that decade. And they had some good albums. I have a couple of their albums, I think, on my list in the early 60s that I really enjoyed from the Supremes. So we're seeing the end of that group as well here. February 13th, we get the debut of Black Sabbath of their self-titled album. And this is credited as the first major album to start the heavy metal genre. So I don't know what was the first heavy metal album, but this is definitely the first big one from the biggest kind of group that really won the. I'm sure Breyer could talk more about this if he was on the channel about the significance of Black Sabbath. Or Nick, he also knows a lot about Black Sabbath and just how they're credited with probably being one of the godfathers. Maybe they are the godfather of heavy metal or something. Anyway, so I thought that was significant to go. Yeah, definitely getting heavier here with Black Sabbath. February 14th, we have The Who record live at Leeds. This is one of their biggest live albums that they did and a big concert for them. In fact, Breyer from Breyer's Music Showcase, he had this on his top 10 albums of this year. So, and he doesn't like that live album. So it's a pretty good live album, I suppose, if he made his top 10. February 27th, Jefferson Airplane is fined $1,000 for using profanity in a concert in Oklahoma City. Yeah, this is definitely, or this maybe because Oklahoma, we're still in the Bible Belt, maybe, but we're talking about a time when, yeah, I guess he couldn't curse, or certain words you couldn't use in concert. I know that at some point that changed where you music, of course, had more curse words later on, and I'm sure more people are cursing in concerts. But at this point, it was still a no for using profanity, evidently, and you get fined $1,000 for it. February 28th, Elvis Presley breaks attendance record at the Houston Astrodome. I think it's kind of interesting. Elvis Presley, I mean, he's been going strong since 1956, and now we're entering his third decade, basically. 50s, 60s. Now he's getting to the 70s. 14 years later after his debut, and he's still. You'd think his popularity would be going down, but he's still selling out big stadiums like the Houston Astrodome. So I think that's interesting. Here's an interesting story I didn't know anything about, which is kind of crazy, and that is on March 26th, Peter Yarrow, who I'm pretty sure is part of the Peter, Paul, and Mary group, he pleads guilty to taking immoral liberties with a 14-year-old girl. So, Peter Yarrow, what are you doing? I had no idea he was in this kind of trouble, but that doesn't sound good. I don't know exactly happened from that. I'm guessing Peter, Paul, and Mary were done by this point. But taking immoral liberties with a 14-year-old girl, so not good. April 10th, a very big day for Beatle fans. Paul McCartney publicly announces that he has left the Beatles in a press release. This is interesting because after they make they made Let It Be, like I said, but then it was going through a lot of issues of mixings and stuff, and they end up making another album afterwards, Abbey Roads, which came out in '69. After they made Abbey Roads, basically in a meeting that they had, like a group meeting, John Lennon basically says, I'm done. I'm quitting the group. So to me, John Lennon was really kind of the first person to really quit the Beatles, or really kind of make it like I feel like Paul McCartney was still willing to go on. Ringo was still willing to go on. George probably wanted to quit as well because he wanted to start his solo career because his stuff wasn't getting on the Beatle albums. He couldn't compete with Lennon McCartney. But it felt like at this meeting when John said that was like, the nail in the coffin. Like, yeah, this is the end of the Beatles, basically. But they still had Let It Be to come out. They're still, getting that ready to come out. And also the documentary Let It Be also came out this year. So they kind of decided, let's not talk about, the Beatles breaking up till I think they didn't want to talk about it probably till after the album came out. So it was kind of a hush-hush thing. But it's one of those things where Paul McCartney is very distraught over it. From what I've read, he was very depressed over this breaking up of the Beatles. He was still willing to go on. And so he was interviewed, and he mentioned that, yeah, the Beatles. So it's funny, when you look at the trivia, it's going to be like who was the first to break up with the Beatles. It's going to be Paul McCartney because he was the first one to publicly announce it. But he really wasn't the first, I think, to really quit. It was really more John Lennon. But and again, Paul McCartney probably didn't need to say anything, but I'm sure he was bitter, and so that's why he decided to go against the wishes of the other band members and keeping this hush hush. It probably upset them all, which Paul McCartney has been known to do that. He was also the first one to admit to taking LSD, even though he wasn't as big of an LSD. He was the last one to take LSD in the group. All the other three were taking LSD before him. But because he was asked by a reporter, he says, yeah, I take LSD, and we do. And kind of, that was a big thing, controversy. And it's like one of those things where, I don't know, Paul McCartney could just not say anything. He just shut his yapper. And yet he always feels when he gets asked a question, I'm sure there's reasons why he did it. Again, he was, stirring something up. But yeah, so that's where, again, huge news. I can't imagine being a Beatles fan at that time and then hearing your favorite band was breaking up. And, it was, I'm sure, very depressing. I'm sure if it was me, I would be very upset for quite a while hearing that kind of news anyway. So, yeah, that happened this year. April 14th, Michael Nesmith announces he left the Monkees. So 4 days after Paul McCartney announces that he's leaving the Beatles, we get Michael Nesmith lead the Monkees, which I didn't realize this. And Michael Nesmith lead the Monkees probably got, no offense to the Monkees, but that probably wasn't as big of a story as Paul McCartney leaving the Beatles. So I didn't know this, and the news probably got buried over, what Paul McCartney, announcing his leaving the Beatles. So that's interesting, though. Monkees, another big band of the '60s, late '60s, especially one of the big bands. So we're also seeing the end of the Monkees as well, evidently. Though they do, I think they will make some more albums, but Michael Nesmith, a big part of the band, is leaving at this point. Okay, April 24th. This is one of the crazy stories. I had to put this down and talk about it because it's such a crazy story. We go back to Jefferson Airplane and we go back to Grace Slick, who I think is definitely the most controversial figure of the group, the lead singer. But she said a lot of crazy stuff. She was on drugs and all that. But she was a bit of a wacko, I think, and was not afraid to say controversial stuff. And so this story is so crazy, but Nixon was the president at the time. Nixon's daughter is a big fan of Jefferson Airplane, and so she invites, I'm guessing without, maybe, I don't know if her dad didn't know that she did this, but she invites Grace Slick to come to the White House. If they're having some kind of party at the White House, whatever, she invites Grace Slick because she's a big fan. Well, that's not a good idea because Grace Slick is a raving lunatic liberal who hates Nixon, and so yeah, it's just, and she's not afraid to do something. She's not afraid to go out and do something she shouldn't be doing, um, something controversial, anyways. So probably not a good idea, but yeah. So she invites Abbie Hoffman to come with her. Abbie Hoffman was kind of another kind of controversial figure. I think he's very liberal. He was a Democrat. He got arrested as part of the Chicago Seven, who got arrested from. There was a riot at the Democrat National Convention, and he's one of the 7 people that kind of were convicted of inciting the riot, I believe. Anyways, but I think he was somewhat of a humorist and maybe a writer at the time. Anyway, so you have 2 kind of loony leftist liberals coming to the White House of Nixon, who they hate. And what is the plan of Grace Slick and Abbie Hoffman? Well, they're bringing some LSD with them, and they were going to spike the president's drink. That was their goal, was to slip some LSD in President Nixon's. I can't imagine what kind of crime. I mean, it's got to be some kind of crime to drug the president of the United States, basically, against his will. I must have had some kind of jail sentence to it. So I don't know why they would risk going to jail for, trying to hurt the president with LSD or whatever. I mean, what a crazy idea, too. I mean, and a very jerky idea, a very terrible thing to do. Somebody slipped them LSD and let them go nuts, Luckily, that did not happen because security stopped Grace Slick from coming into the White House because her name was already on the FBI list. So the FBI already knew about her. She probably said a bunch of crazy, violent stuff towards Nixon. So she probably already got put on the list of Grace Slick cannot come to the White House or cannot come anywhere near President Nixon. So Grace Slick and Abbie Hoffman never got into the White House to do what they wanted to do, luckily, or have been bigger news. But I still think it's such a crazy story. I had to talk about it. July 4th, we have the Music Countdown Show, American Top 40. So, debut of a very big show that, count down the 40 big hits of the time anyway. So, that would go on for a long time, I believe. August 26th through 30th, we have the Isle of Wight Festival, which becomes the largest rock festival at that time. I guess even bigger than Woodstock. But it's funny, we always talk about Woodstock, but we don't talk about the Isle of Wight as much, Live at Leeds, I guess. I'm trying to think, there's other big, Monterey Pop Festival will be kind of a big thing. Live Aid later on is a big, those are kind of the ones we talk about. We don't talk about Isle of Wight as much, but evidently it was the biggest concert at that time. And I know the Who put on a really great. I've seen a lot of footage of the Who playing at the Isle of Wight, so that's what I mostly think of the Who when I think of the Isle of Wight concert. Anyways, putting out some of their best stuff. All right, the next two big news stories are the deaths of two kind of rock legends happen less than a month apart. We lose two people. First, we in September 18th, Jimi Hendrix is found dead at age 27 in his I believe a hotel room. Died of a drug overdose. And I've covered this on I did a deep dive on Jimi Hendrix a little while ago, maybe a couple years ago. Yeah, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, that basically that group broke up. Jimi Hendrix was going to go solo. I believe he was in England at the time when this happened, and he was like jamming with another band the night before, and then he took the drugs, and then he was by himself, and then someone found him, dead, and all that. So it's like, man, what it wasted. He only made 3 albums. His debut album was like 1967, I think. So I mean, the guy only had maybe 3 years of huge fame, and put out some. But in 3 years, I mean, I don't know anybody that's put out more iconic music in 3 years and became such a iconic rock legend, and in my opinion, the best guitar player of all time. And kind of the when I think of psychedelic music, I think of Jimi Hendrix. Kind of really encapsulates the hippie psychedelic era. But it's crazy. He was only 27, so he kind of starts that whole 27 club. All these famous musicians dying at age 27. And man, I just go, man, how many great music could we have? What did we miss out on with Jimi Hendrix dying so young, only putting out 3 albums? I mean, man, I just imagine if he would have lived throughout the 70s, how many great albums and great songs we would have gotten. It would have been huge. I mean, it feels like he just began. He was just beginning his music career, only 3 years in, and then he's gone. October 4th, we get the death of another rock legend. That is Janis Joplin, who also was 27, which is crazy. Two very famous rock singers, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, both age 27. She died from a heroin overdose. So both died of drugs. And we're going to see this again with, people like Jim Morrison. And I think just a year before, I had to talk about Brian Jones dying from drowning after taking some drugs. So we're seeing, and he was 27. So this is like the third, I can think of, third major, rock musician to die at age 27 and kind of dealing with drugs. So it's a very sad thing that's going on. Lots of people dying way before their time, including Janis Joplin, because I feel like, what has she done? It seemed like just a year or two ago, Pearl, I think, was her big album, just came out. So she's still, again, doesn't seem like she's very far into her career, and she's already considered one of the greats as far as rock singers go, female rock singers especially. And then the last news story is on Jim Morrison, but this is on October 30th. He is arrested for indecent exposure. I don't know if he did any indecent exposure, but I do remember this being like a big news story at the time. But I think they're really after Jimmy Morrison and the Doors, because he was also big in drugs, and I think they had some controversies, maybe, especially Jim Morrison. I think did a lot of crazy stuff. So I'm sure the police were out to get him anyways, and so they hit him with this indecent exposure. Like I said, we're eventually going to see him die of drugs here pretty soon at age 27. So it's kind of crazy. All these people dying at age 27 in such a short period of time. But yeah, that's the last big news item I have on here. So like I said, new bands. We got Black Sabbath debuting this year. Jimmy Buffett debuts this year as well. Eric Clapton kind of started his solo career. I mean, it's Derek and the Dominoes is basically his kind of starting solo career. Supertramp also gets their start this year as well. Stephen Stills debuts his self-titled album, along with, we got McCartney, like I said, John Lennon, George Harrison, all debuting their solo careers as well. And Don McLean also coming out with his first album, though this next year we're going to get his really big album, American Pie. So the first album, really just a bunch of cover songs, not much to talk about. But Don McLean, though, will be very well remembered the next year for that album and for the song. But yeah, so that's all the new bands starting this year, and I talked about some that ended. And yeah, so it was the big times of 1970. Great year of music, lots of interesting stuff happening here. Hope you enjoyed this recap of the year 1970. Please tell me anything I missed. That what's and of course you always say, what's your favorite album from this year, or albums that are worth listening to, recommendations, all that. And just big, if you remember any big moments that happened in 1970, love to read any of your comments. And I thank you so much for commenting. Thanks so much for watching the video, liking it, and hope you enjoyed the look at 1970 and our top 10 of 70. And we'll be hitting 71 before too long, one of the greatest years of music as well. But thank you for all the subscribers, for supporting the channel. I appreciate all you, and I hope you have a nice rest of the weekend and a good Thanksgiving next week. So we'll see you later.